warm welcome to the show to former Chief Constable of Manchester, Sir Peter Fahy. Good evening, Sir Peter.
Good evening.
First of all, I think that a lot of people in this country, particularly in London, are confused and bemused as to why the Met Police Chief, Cressida Dick, continues to refuse to launch a criminal investigation into potential law breaking in Downing Street. We have nine parties are accused of breaking COVID rules. And this last one, 40 people in a garden when the rest of us were only allowed to meet in pairs, 2 meters apart. I mean, I'm not making any hard and fast allegations, but surely there is a case there for a potential investigation for the police. Surely they should be investigating this.
No, and I can understand those questions and, that bemusement. But essentially, what we're talking about here at this stage of the pandemic we're talking about an offence which was punishable by a fixed penalty ticket, by a fine. And, it is absolutely the case that would not be normal for the police to go back and investigate that level of offence, 2 years ago. Whether it was somebody said you'd sped at 40 miles an hour, the police would say, sorry, it's too long ago, we're not going back to investigate it. And that really is what the Metropolitan Police have relied upon. Now, I think, as you're saying, number one, there is this wider level of public concern about it. It is about the number of events that seem to have been taking place. This unfortunately seems to be systematic. And I think you're right. In one way, I can understand why the Metropolitan Police are saying it's not a case that we would investigate. On the other hand, I think that level of public concern, that level of public bemusement means that, declining to investigate is itself damaging confidence in the police, particularly when ministers say it is for the civil servant to decide whether somebody broke the law or not. I can understand the public saying, well, I don't get that chance. It is the police or the court that decides whether I've broken the law or not. So, I certainly feel now that there should be an investigation. I think all this, Kevin, is really bizarre, isn't it, in a way, because really somebody of the Prime Minister's standing should be, coming forward and say, I believe I've broken the law. Please investigate it. The police refer it to the Crown Prosecution Service, and I'm quite willing to pay the fine. I think, we're in really difficult territory, strange territory here. And therefore, again, for the Met, for any Chief Constable, for the Commissioner, it's not like there's any precedent or any similar case to go back on. This is a really strange, set of circumstances. But, I would say absolutely, the level of that public concern, the focus, all the rest of it, means there should be investigation. But even today, the Prime Minister's words, in a way, are an admission that the legislation at the time was confused because he himself doesn't seem to understand it and didn't know what was happening and whether it was against the law or not.
Well, I can remember it, and I didn't like the rules very much, but I did obey them, and that was if I wanted to see a mate of mine, I was able to do it, but I couldn't see two mates. We had to stand 2 meters apart when there were two of us. So 40 people in a back garden does seem to be worth investigating. And I take your point that normally the police wouldn't investigate a 2-year-old relatively minor infringement. But technically the police can investigate, and this is a very special circumstance. This is causing a great deal of public concern, a great deal of public fury. So given that the police can investigate if they want to, if you were the Met Police Chief, would you call an investigation?
I probably would say, Kevin, now, because of this whole set of circumstances, because of that level of public concern, and whether we like it or not, we're now in new territory. Even things like with 24-hour news, it's very different from 10 years ago in policing. And I think you have to recognise that level of public concern. And at the very least, the circumstances here are not that complicated. You should be able to put that set of circumstances in front of the Crown Prosecution Service and say, you come up with a view. You are the people who are actually employed to take a view on, number one, is there enough evidence? And number two, is it in the public interest? So I do absolutely agree with you. I think the level of concern has got to the stage where there should be a police investigation. It's getting more and more bizarre. as we move forward. But I think part of the frustration is it's almost like the Prime Minister has, as you say, introduced almost a get-out clause into legislation which was supposed to be really crystal cut. Because you're absolutely right, Kevin. At that time, part of the whole issue was it's really clear. You only are outside, to do essential shopping, to care for a vulnerable person, or for exercise. The Prime Minister now seems to, and number 10 in all their discussions seems to have introduced another thing whereby if you're at work, you can bring a lot of other people together and have booze and the rest of it. And it's just, bringing the whole thing into disrepute. And just one last thing, Kevin, when all this is blown over, this is going to make it harder for the police because there's going to be more and more people out there who are going to say, well, why should I obey the law? Because of the people who make the law, and all that is bad for policing long term, and it's just bad for the sort of rule of law, and for people thinking it might be a good idea, to obey that law. If they think, well, I'll just, if I see a way around it, I will. That long term is probably more damaging for policing than this particular issue about whether they should investigate this party or not.
Indeed, I mean it's the equivalent if I get arrested for shoplifting. It's like me turning around to the police officers and saying, it's okay, you don't have to investigate me now because I've launched my own investigation. When I get the results through, I'll let you know what they are, and then you can decide whether or not to look into prosecuting me. I mean, that isn't how things go, is it? Why are the cops saying, oh, we'll wait until Sue Gray's finished her investigation? The trouble with this, sorry to interrupt, the trouble with this, Sir Peter, is it looks like the police are doing a favour for the Prime Minister, and that he's getting special treatment, and people will not like that.
No, and I think you're absolutely right, and that's where where the danger of policing lies. The police are actually relying on this issue about they wouldn't normally go back to 2 years and investigate an offence of this level. But as I said earlier, it is about that level of public disquiet. And you're absolutely right as well to say that in normal circumstances, if a crime occurs, the police don't back up and say, well, it's okay, there's an internal investigation. And I was also concerned, Michael Fabricant, another MP yesterday, said, well, it was okay because there wasn't a very high risk of infection. Well, that's like, stopping somebody who's doing 100 miles down the motorway and they're saying it's okay because, there was no traffic or I'm really good.
Yes, exactly.
It's the sort of thing that really annoys policing. So policing in the pandemic was a pretty lonely thing to do. And I think a lot of police officers tonight will be feeling even more lonely and almost, feel, well, even, the government is not really supporting all the difficult decisions that we had to make at that time. And it wasn't just about fines. It was a number of people that were sent home, stopped from what they were doing, all the rest of it. And as I say, long term, that is just going to undermine people's willingness to comply with the law. Because of what they've seen in this case.
Indeed. One last point, Sir Peter. Downing Street obviously has a 24/7 police detail posted at the end of the street. Sometimes coppers stand right by the 10 Downing Street door. They must have seen a lot of coming and going. Wouldn't any of these coppers have perhaps mentioned to some of the Downing Street staff, are you sure this is a good idea, all of you getting together and having a drink stew in the back garden?
No, I agree. The Metropolitan Police have said that, well, those officers are there for security, not for policing number 10. But, I agree with you. I feel it does sort of fail the common sense test. You would have thought some of those officers who were recording everybody coming in and out, it's all on CCTV. At the very least, they might have had a word with somebody and said, look, people the other side of this big gate are being, fined and stopped and all the rest of it. You might want to look at what's going on here because it appears to be breaching the regulations. But all this, in some ways, I think the police would probably say we shouldn't have to do this. We shouldn't have to do this. These are the people that are actually making the laws, going in front of the press conferences, telling the public. The police did their best to try and support those politicians in protecting the public, and I think now feel undermined themselves.
Sir Peter, thank you very much for your time. It was great to talk to you.